Dan, you are live.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday, April 14th meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. Ms. Schmidt, will you please call roll?
Thank you. Chairperson Bowman.
I am present and attending remotely from my home in Ingham County, East Lansing.
Vice Chair Boyle.
I'm also present, attending remotely from East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Member Sullivan.
Present, attending remotely from my home in East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Member Lapine.
Present and attending from Clarkson, Michigan tonight.
Member Wagner.
Present, attending remotely from my house in East Lansing.
Member Wolf.
Here, am I unmuted? Yes. Here, attending remotely from my home in East Lansing.
Members Hendrick and Williams are absent. The rest are present.
And I have Cahill as well.
Cahill, yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Right. Thank you. We do have a quorum and you have, excuse me, I'll just wait until you fully materialized. Commissioner Cahill has joined us. We've just completed roll, Commissioner Cahill. And you are, I might just as well ask if you'd be so kind as to formally state your presence. You're muted right now, Jack.
It's Commissioner Cahill reporting in from his home in East Lansing.
Thank you. You all have it. There was an agenda for this evening's meeting in your packet. I will move, or I will entertain a motion to approve that agenda.
So move. Cahill.
Yep, thank you.
Wolf, second.
That's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Commissioner Wolf. Is there any discussion on that motion? And seeing none, then let's have a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 And those opposed? That motion carries, which reminds me that I'm supposed to read from my script immediately after roll call. Once again, thanking everyone for their patience regarding this new technology, this not so new technology. All members of the public will have an opportunity to address the commission during public comment. And if we had any public hearings, each commission member will be called out individually to speak during each item. A commission member may say pass if they do not have a comment on that item. Commission members are reminded to state their name before speaking or making a motion, and all votes of consequence will be taken with a roll call vote. That said, returning back to our agenda, item 1.3, approval of the minutes you received in your packet, minutes of March 24th, 2001. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Wolf, so moved.
Sullivan, second.
It's been, gotcha, thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Wagner to approve the minutes as submitted. Is there any discussion on that motion? I'm seeing none. So again, let's have a voice vote. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? That motion carries as well. To my knowledge, we do not have any committee reports, so that will move us on to item 3, staff reports. Ms. Schmidt.
I do have a report, a couple here. We will be getting a new planning and zoning administrator on Monday. So we're very excited to be able to announce that. Peter Mesner from Meridian Township will be our new planning and zoning administrator. Also, we have the housing study that will be going to City Council April 20th and April 27th, and it'll be coming to the Planning Commission in May. So those are the two items.
Thank you. Any questions from Ms. Schmidt? All right, thank you. Thank you for that report. On to item 4, commissioner announcements. Any commissioners have anything they wish to announce? All right, then on to item 5, communications from citizens. This is the time in our meeting when we invite members of the public to come forward and make a comment on items that are on our agenda or might possibly not be on our agenda, but just need to be presented to the commission. We will invite callers from our queue to come forward. Each caller in the queue, and I see we have no queue right now, but each caller in the queue will have 5 minutes to address the commission. At the end of 5 minutes, the caller will be placed back on mute. Callers will be identified by the last 3 digits of their phone number. When called upon, the caller will be unmuted. If you do not wish to speak, callers are asked to indicate so by saying pass. If you do wish to speak, we ask that you please clearly state your name and address before addressing the commission. This isn't a requirement, but it does help our clerk with keeping accurate minutes. Again, I see that there are no attendees unless Rebecca or Ms. Dallas, do you have a different map than I do? I think.
Nope, I do not see any attendees this evening.
All right, thank you. Then we will, that is our verbal communications and written communications we received were, I don't remember actually, except for things that are associated with business items. We don't have any written communications either. We have no public hearings, and that will move us on to item 7.1, our first item of old business. This is a consideration of a request for a site plan and special use permit approval from Pi Beta Phi FHC Michigan Gamma LLC for the property at 343 Harrison Road to move the existing dumpster approximately 9 feet closer to Huntington Road. I presume this is all you, Ms. Schmidt, this evening.
Yes, the applicant has provided an email to the Planning Commission. They are no longer seeking this application, and they've been asked to withdraw from the Planning Commission process.
Thank you. Any questions from Ms. Schmidt? Commissioner Cahill.
I wonder what's going to be done about it. I've been driving by there periodically since our last meeting, and at various times I found a car parked where it says no car parking. Other time the top of the dumpster was open, hanging over the fence there. Today when I went by, there were some recycling bins placed behind the dumpster facing the houses out on the street. So it's quite an eyesore for that neighborhood.
Yeah. The only thing that we have right now is, because it is grandfathered, we can have PACE ticket them when there's something that is no longer, to having the recycling bins out would be a ticket if it's not placed behind a screen of some type. And the parking, of course, if they get caught parking in a non-parking space, they will be ticketed.
Those are usually done on a report basis. Are they? I mean, I presume perhaps depending on how egregious the parking violation is. I've seen sometimes people parked over sidewalks. I don't imagine that they necessarily got called in, but those are not on an on-demand basis.
Typically, they're called in, reported, but not always. Sometimes they're just making a routine drive-by and notice something.
Any other questions from Ms. Schmidt or comments? Commissioner Wolf.
So just to confirm, there's nothing we can do to require enclosing the front of the dumpster area. Is that right?
Unfortunately, no, we cannot.
Okay.
All right, and since it's just a withdrawal, there's no need for us to make a motion since we'll not be acting on it at a later date. All right. Any remaining questions or comments from Ms. Schmidt? All right, Commissioner Wolf and then Commissioner Cahill.
Just a matter of procedure that occurred to me. Does that mean will this still go to City Council, or does it get withdrawn?
No, it's withdrawn completely
At this point.
any further, right?
Commissioner Cahill.
I'm just wondering why the ordinance can't be enforced.
The ordinance can be enforced. They would have to make a change to their site plan in order for us to kick in the new requirements, because when they were first having a dumpster in that location, we did not require dumpster enclosures. So that's grandfathered in.
I'm just making sure that there's no more questions. All right, then if there are no more questions, then let's proceed to Item 7.2, this is a consideration of a request for a site plan and special use permit approval from MJW Investment LLC for the property at 128 Collingwood Drive to establish a Class A multiple family residence, which is to say a fraternity. Ms. Schmidt.
Yes, thank you. The applicant has submitted an email to the Planning Commission. They have not gotten all of the information that's required for them to be back on the agenda. As they have provided some of the information, it's actually brought up more questions that we have from the building department and the housing department. So we are hoping that they will have everything to us in time for the next meeting, but it's not for sure. They may have to provide us with new architectural drawings. We're waiting to find out from the building department if that's the case.
Any questions for Ms. Schmidt? Okay, in this case, I think we do need a motion to postpone to a date certain or to at least to a later date. Commissioner Wolf?
I'll move that we, sorry, I forgot what the address, move the hearing for 128 Collingwood Drive to our April 28th meeting, that we defer it to then.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Sullivan, second.
Thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Sullivan to postpone action on this item until at the earliest our the Planning Commission's April 28th meeting. Is there any discussion on that motion? All right, seeing none, well, let's have a roll call vote. Ms. Schmidt, please.
Member Wolf,
Yes.
Member Wagner,
Yes.
Member Sullivan,
Yes.
Member Lapine,
Yes.
Member Cahill,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Boyle,
Yes.
Chairperson Bowman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. Moving us on to new business, item 8.1. This is a site plan extension request from 3400 Coolidge LLC for the property at 3401 Coolidge Road. Ms. Schmidt.
Thank you. The applicant was not able to be on the meeting tonight. They accepted that they may have this switched to the next meeting if there's any questions that staff cannot answer for them. Both the managers of the company were unavailable tonight. So they're asking for an extension of the site plan due to many issues at the time, but a lot of them stem from the COVID circumstances. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. I should note that Commissioner Hendricks has joined us. I
Great.
presume remotely. You're muted, Thomas.
Yes, I did. Sorry about that. I didn't
No
know
worries.
it was late, so my
That's
apologies.
fine. Welcome. And you're attending remotely from?
East Lansing.
Thank you. Terrific. It's 7:15. Any questions from Ms. Schmidt regarding the application for the extension? Okay, see, is this something that we are comfortable acting on tonight? Thank you, Vice Chair Boyle.
I don't see why we can't act on it tonight. Do we have a date certain for what a year would be?
Yes, I thought it was in the air report or in the.
It says that council granted their approval on July 14th, 2020.
Okay, so it would be, it was what, I'm sorry, Dan.
That's fine. According to the staff, or to the approval letter that it was sent, July 14th, 2020 is when council acted to approve the application.
So it would be a year from then.
Commissioner Wolf?
Does this fall under our usual rules? I'm not sure if it does, but in other words, do we need to suspend the rules to vote on this, or?
No, it does not fall under our normal rules. You can just vote on it tonight.
Commissioner Wolf.
Then I'll move that we approve a 1-year extension of the site plan approval for parcels at 3400 West Road and 3401 Coolidge Road, which would extend their their site plan approval to July, I'm losing it here, July 14th of 2022.
Yes, thank you. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Support, Cahill.
Thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Cahill to extend a 1 year or offer a 1-year extension to July 14th, 2021 for the subject properties. Any discussion on that motion? I'm seeing no hands. Ms. Schmidt, could we have a, oops, excuse me, Commissioner Wagner.
I just have a question. I think Chris said 2022 and you just said 2021.
So 2022 is actually correct. I misstated the motion. Thank you very much. I've lost a year, I guess.
No, I just want to make sure.
Thank you. Indeed, it should be 2022. Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? All right, Ms. Schmidt, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Chairperson Bowman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Boyle,
Yes.
Member Cahill,
Yes.
Member Hendricks,
Yes.
Member Lapine,
Yes.
Member Sullivan,
Yes.
Member Wagner,
Yes.
Member Wolf.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. That will move us on to our second item of new business this evening. The shaping new. Oh, excuse me, Commissioner Wolf.
Before we leave that, I have a question for Darcy, and that is, they have to make a similar request to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Is that correct?
Yes, and they've also done that, and that will be on the May agenda.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Then item 8.2, shaping the avenue work session, review of public comments and action items. Ms. Schmidt.
Thank you. We left off on page 5 of the memo with the topic of ordinance 900, and we've put all of the recommendations that staff has to complete the list. I do have one additional item that is not something that the commission necessarily needs to act on, but we had talked about it briefly at the last meeting. Staff will be working with the city attorney to make sure that the architectural standards are warranted throughout the entire document so that we have validation that this can be done as an architectural aesthetic standards. So we'll be working with city attorney and he'll be helping us make sure that this is documented throughout the document and that we won't have any legal issues in the future if we do adopt the plan. And with that, we can start out on item 3 on page 5.
Commissioner Wolf.
Since we're talking about architectural standards, I brought this up before and I'll just mention it again. That the architectural standards are the part of the code that I am by far the least comfortable with. And we have improved them since we started on it. We've made them less restrictive. My preference would be to eliminate them entirely. I think they are still too restrictive. They don't allow enough freedom to landowners, developers, architects, and so forth, and really don't gain that much for it. So just making that comment that my opinion has not changed too much. I understand why people like them in there. I understand why most form-based codes do have architectural standards similar to these in them, although not all do. As I mentioned at one of our earlier meetings, there are form-based codes that do not regulate down to that level. They focus more on the overall building forms and spacing and that sort of thing that's covered in what we call the building form standards. So I realize I'm a minority viewpoint, but I just wanted to bring it up again.
Thank you. I actually think that it sounds to me like one of the things that has been recommended, and that Darcy, Ms. Schmidt had just indicated that they're going to be working on, is tying potential strictly aesthetic goals with what I'll call more objective standards. That it seemed that the opinion was that it's probably okay to use aesthetics as a justification, but the case will be stronger if somehow a much more measurable more measurable factors could be tied into some of the architectural standards. So I guess we'll see as things continue to move, as that language gets drafted between the city attorney and planning staff. Maybe it'll provide at least some better justification for some of the architectural standards that are in place now. Commissioner Wolf.
And actually, I have a somewhat concrete example for this. If you remember, a year and a half ago or so, we had a lot split request on terrain, which I think we recommended the split, and then City Council eventually went ahead and did the split. And since then, they have split the lot and built a new house on the new lot. And I don't believe that house with its design would have met the architectural standards that we have in here. Now, it's not part of the Shaping the Avenue form district, but it could just as well have been. And I just love the house. It does not match anything else on the block. It's pretty much ultra modern. It's a great example of a small house that I believe it's less than 700 square feet. And I don't think it could have been built under the new standards. We do have a provision in there where they could appeal. I forgot what it's called exactly, but they can present their design and say why they think they deserve exceptions. But I don't really care that much for the idea of making builders, architects do that. I think we're better off if we let them pretty much design their buildings themselves.
It's funny you mentioned that as an example, because I think that's a prime example as to so I'll say traditionally, the form that had been established, say in terms of setback or style or character of the block, would probably have been observed more closely by in this particular case, it was the last property on the block, and it's I mean, I'm not really surprised. I know I've mentioned that the house at a meeting before, sort of in passing, and of course you get nods because I think it's pretty obvious that it does definitely not match the character of the houses around it. For some people, that's a good thing. For some people, that's not so good. And I have always valued your willingness to I guess stand up for us design professionals. I think in this case that I think that was a misstep, and I think that and we knew that when we had recommended approval for the lot split, that it was highly possible, in fact pretty likely, that the building that was built on that lot was going to break that pattern. I guess in this case, and once again, I respect your opinion greatly. In this one, we're going to have to disagree.
Yeah, I was actually expecting something else, a different type of design that I feared I would not like at all, and would also be out of line with the existing, the surrounding houses. But
Commissioner Cahill.
Since we're on the subject of that terrain house, that's one of my great regrets, is allowing that lot split. And we had discussion at the time about requiring that anything that be built be set back. And we ended up not doing that. But when the pandemic first came down and finally was eased, the first time I was out driving somewhere, I was coming down Saginaw, and I thought, I'll look at to see how what's going on in terrain there at that house we allowed because of the lot split. And I looked to my right, and I was driving in the right lane, and I saw this house looming out like it looked like it was going to jump out into Terrain Street. And I was so shocked looking at it that I didn't pay attention to the road, and I hit the corner curb. And that was about $1,800 later. I was able to fix it.
See, it's
So I deeply regret that we approved.
sorry,
that,
I
lot
laugh
split.
at your literal expense, but
Right.
it's just dangerous architecture.
I actually enjoy the architecture. I don't enjoy it where it is.
There you go.
As far as the setback goes, I believe it is actually closer to what would be required in our form-based code. It's brought closer to the street than most of the others on the block. I don't know if it's actually close enough to meet whatever we might someday wind up putting into effect in that area, but.
All right. I note that if we go back to the document, the memorandum, there is no item 2, Ms. Schmidt. I don't know if it's necessary to repaginate, or to renumber, but I go from page 5, item 1, and then page 6, item 3, just to be, just so that we're clear that we're not, if we move on to page number 3 and don't talk about 2, that's why. But in this case, Ms. Schmitz provided some language as to how how ordinance 900 might be impacted by or under the form-based code. I presume we've all had an opportunity to read it, but it's short if you want to take a moment now, and then we can discuss that. Any comments or questions from Ms. Schmidt? Yep, Commissioner Wolf.
Sure, can you explain the impact of it? I'm having a little trouble. The issue is that some of our new residential zones in the form-based code fall into areas that have rental restriction overlays under. Oh, I'm sorry, this isn't the.
No, this is ordinance 900. And
Oh, okay. It's not the
license.
Okay,
Yes.
it's not the overlays.
Yes. Yeah, that's later.
Okay, well then still, I guess the same question. In our form-based residential districts, the largest, the most dense ones are small apartment buildings. So those would not be covered. Those are not considered single family or 2-family dwellings. We do have townhouses allowed and cottages. Would either of those be considered single or 2-family?
Yes.
So if someone chose to build townhouses there, they would be limited by ordinance 900. I guess that makes sense. I'm still trying to picture the impact of it, but since we're already restricting it that way, if you built detached houses,
Has there ever been, Ms. Schmidt, is there been, probably not, but, or is there a mechanism by which the overlay restrictions can be removed? Presumably just the opposite, the whatever, is it 1/3 or 2/3 or?
Yeah. I think
Whatever the number is,
I
basically.
can't remember off the top of my head.
The
Yeah,
same.
it's basically the same exact process.
okay, but this is not the overlay, right?
No, this is ordinance 900.
Thank you, sorry.
Yep.
Okay,
All
but
right.
all right, I
I'll
just
talk
read
about
it.
that later. Yep.
Yeah, I just read it again, and now I'm not sure. I think what I said is not right, because it says all residential uses in the Avenue Form District shall comply with the
Right.
occupancy.
And what those occupancies say is that in single family and two family residential units, that you can only have a family or two unrelated.
It seems like the way it's worded could be misread. All residential uses.
Vice Chair Boyle. Vice Chair.
Yes, yeah, I have a question then. Looking at this, and unfortunately, the map that I have on my 8.5 by 11 inch printout is a little difficult for me to look at the fine distinctions. Ordinance 900 is, I understand, affected R2 and R1 of the current zoning code.
RA, R1, R2, and R3.
Okay, RA, that's right.
Yeah.
All right. All right. And so right now, the downtown area is B2, right? Or B3? B3. Is B3. So ordinance 900 doesn't impact that.
No.
With the Avenue Form District, does that change the boundaries of the current residential zones in that area of East Lansing?
No, but I believe it allows more options for doing single family and two family units.
But what is R2 now would be single family, a family or two unrelateds,
Right.
as it is now.
Correct.
But you might be able to put them in a townhouse or in townhouses instead of just detached homes.
Correct.
Is that correct? What
That's
other
correct.
what other family or two unrelated might there be?
You could do a duplex with like a duplex flat. You could do anything two units or less. So it
Okay,
for a lot of it's making sure that if those decisions are made, that those that ordinance 900 still applies.
right. Well, I mean, in my opinion, that's what really stabilized the residential areas surrounding downtown more so than the overlay districts do. I think ordinance 900 was what really stopped the conversions there. So to lose that would make a big difference.
Yes.
Commissioner Wolf.
I don't know if I'm just dense tonight, but I still can't quite understand what this would do. It says all residential uses. So there are going to be residential uses in both the M districts and the R districts. There are going to be residential uses throughout the entire.
Right, but then it goes on to say for single and two family dwellings.
Well, shouldn't it say that at the beginning then to make it clearer? What if it said all single family and two family dwelling or residential dwellings
That works.
in the Avenue Form District shall comply with, et cetera.
That would work also.
I like the sound of that better.
And so then again, to clarify it, the small apartment buildings that could be built in the R4 and R3, I'm trying to remember the numbers here. I don't have it in front of me.
3, 4.
Those would not be single family or two family, correct?
Right.
They would be multiple family like our other apartment buildings.
Right.
And townhouses are not a multiple family, correct?
No, they're not considered multiple family.
Is that explicit somewhere?
I believe it's in the definitions of the code.
Okay,
of the main code.
all right. It's the townhouses that are a little bit fuzzy in my mind, but if it's cleared up in the definitions, that would do it. All right, thank you.
Other questions from Ms. Schmidt or questions generally about this, the proposed text? All right, then we'll move on to item 4. Finally, returning to some language regarding the historic district, the historic districts. Again, the text is in front of you. I'll presume you've all read it. If you've not, it's certainly short enough, but are there any questions for Ms. Schmidt regarding the intent and ultimately, I suppose, the enforcement of this language? I don't know, Ms. Schmidt, if I think it's fine the way it is. I don't know if you're obligated to include the Secretary of the Interior standards, just because Chapter 20 would mention that anyway, but it might very well be, I don't know, either out of convenience or because people expect to see it, including it here.
Yeah, I agree. I think it could go either way. It's nice for them to see. I know a lot of people have had questions about that, the previous language not covering fully what the historic district would require. So that was added in just to add more clarification, but it could be left out as well. Chapter 20 does.
Commissioner Wolf?
I think there's an extra stray word in here in the next to last line where it says, and or the requirements of Chapter 20 or of the city code.
Remove the of.
I think so. The requirements of this. Requirements. Well, now that I read it again, maybe it's not completely unnecessary, but when I first read it, it seemed extra. No, right, it shouldn't be there because it's Chapter 20 of the city. The word or should be gone.
That's right.
Right. Right.
Any other questions for Ms. Schmidt regarding item 4? All right. Item 5. Staff is recommending removing the language requiring alleys.
This is a big one.
Yeah, it is. And it's one I'd hate to see go. In fact, actually, as I was thinking, I think I mentioned to you that I'd been doing my morning walks trying to sort of get a better idea about how this new code would impact the area that it's intended to be in place. And it was actually, I made a point of specifically walking through some of the established alleys and thinking about how we might go about temporarily establishing, I will say temporary alleys until everybody is on the block is bought in. And I absolutely admit through and through that it will be a difficult undertaking, right? Basically asking people to reserve property at the back of their lots for some future alley that may truly never come to pass.
Right.
I actually at one point thought, and I know we passed on the idea of putting fees in lieu of, in order to gain additional height, but I thought maybe that would be a way to secure alley land. And I know that we sort of passed on that as an idea, generally speaking, but would that be a way to potentially finance the acquisition of right of way in order to establish these alleys at some point? I don't know that there's a real avenue there,
Right.
but.
And since we can't make them public alleys, it would be difficult to make, who maintains them. They would, each block would have to have an association of some type. You know, you would have to have the whole block bought in to it before you could actually do that. So there's a lot of moving parts, and to actually manage this process would be a nightmare.
This is one of the trickier parts about trying to overlay this particular zone in an established city. I mean,
Right.
as I walked into a couple of the alleys, it seemed to me there's an awful lot of potential there. If everybody would sort of get together and tidy up their, the backs of their lots, you probably could have several other additional parking spaces. And I mean, it really could be a nice solution as to how to get in and out without crowding the street. I think that we had talked about this at one point about how if the alleys were, I'll say postponed, but ultimately eliminated, we would have to make some provision for providing access as it is right now from the street, but also addressing the fact that each of the lots has an expected minimum frontage build to. I think the most intense is 70% required. I'm forgetting, but basically the front property line would have to be built from side property line to side property line and cover as much as 70% of that particular distance. And so now those are going to potentially be punctuated by driveways. When I read that, I wasn't really all that surprised as a potential, I'll say, solution to this difficult puzzle. I can't say that I'm not disappointed, but I think but you're probably right that it's going to be difficult to overlay that on the entire city, or at least the places that are impacted by the avenue form. Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, I kind of hate to see this go also, but it does not seem very practical, and there's definitely going to be a lot of opposition to it. I wanted to point out that I think we talked about this before. I can't find it right now, but I believe we have in the code another thing we'll need to change if the alleys are not going to be there. There's a required privacy fence at the back of most or all lots. And if there's an alley there, it's allowed to be just 3 feet from the lot line. But if there is no alley there, it has to be 20 feet or something, a much greater amount, with the idea being that it would leave enough room there to create an alley later. So if we are not going to require alleys, then I think we need to change that.
Yeah, there's a couple things that will need to be changed because of taking the alleys out. Some of the graphics obviously will need to be changed, and the language referring to all the alley.
Well, I mean, not all of them, right? But we're still going to support the existing alleys.
Exactly, but the making of a new alley.
Yeah, Commissioner Cahill.
I'm just wondering, out of curiosity, how did the alleys that we have currently come to be alleys?
They were part of the subdivision, the original subdivisions.
So it was plotted out that way, and
Right.
okay, but only some of the blocks.
Right.
Okay.
And the intention is to maintain the existing, I mean, I don't know that is there any provision or any move to remove the existing alleys, that it seems that those places that currently have alleys would potentially benefit in that they could build the entire length of the frontage, whereas those that don't have, that still are going to require access from the front of the lot to the rear of the lot, are going to potentially lose, at least at the street level, a certain portion of their frontage in order to allow access for automobiles. All right, any other discussion on this item? All right. Item 6, regarding marijuana provisioning centers. Yeah, staff's recommending removing this language since it's not currently permitted in the Shaping the Avenue district. Any discussion on that item? That doesn't seem like Commissioner Cahill, maybe Commissioner Cahill.
By removing it, are we presuming they would never be allowed in that area?
That's correct. There's an overlay where these provisioning centers are allowed, and the overlay does not cover, or the Shaping the Avenue does not cover any part of those overlays.
But that could be changed in the future.
Probably not very likely. And if it is, then we'll add it into if this does get adopted, then we would add it back in.
Okay.
Commissioner Wolf, did I see your hand? Yes, please.
Yeah. Maybe I'm not understanding what you just said, but the overlay district for provisioning centers does overlap with Shaping the Avenue on East Grand River, right?
Not that
It
I'm
is.
aware of. The only Shaping the Avenue covers East Village
Right.
on the south side of Grand River, but that's it, right?
And that is part of the marijuana provisioning center overlay.
Oh, it is.
Is there one property in there?
Yeah, Pincana, which is just about to open, it looks like,
It's there already.
The one in front of the fraternity,
or next door to it. Yeah.
next door, kitty
Yeah.
corner. Yeah.
Then we should probably keep that.
Thank you, Commissioner Wolf. So are we thinking then, given that I guess the question remains then that is it sufficient to show where the uses are allowed? It's a relatively small area then. Or maybe that was one of the bigger ones, was it not? Or potentially.
We can direct through a note in the use chart. We can direct them to the overlay map, and that should cover it.
Right now.
All right, Commissioner Wolf, please.
Yeah.
I was making a note. Go ahead.
In the other parts of our code, we don't have anything that points to the marijuana overlays, do we? We wrote that as a new section.
Right.
Okay, but if you look at the East Village code, you don't see something now that says a portion of this falls in the overlay, so go look at such and such.
Right. However,
Go ahead.
this being a little bit different than our zoning code, when you would want to at least, there's a lot of things in this code that we've added just to make it clear that they do refer back to the lighting plan, so this would be similar to that, like we refer to the lighting plan, the lighting section in the code. We can leave it out.
Yeah, no, actually, I wasn't suggesting that. I was suggesting that because we're already, by doing this, we'd be going beyond what we do in the rest of the code. So I think it would be sufficient.
Right.
I think doing it that way is good.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this item? Then item 7, this is regarding the additional height bonus for public plaza or civic green. Sorry, I'm going to dig up the the text. So excuse me. This is on page 71 of 109 or 99 of 137 of today's packet. Item 406D. Commissioner Sullivan.
Yeah, I'm wondering if someone can refresh my memory. This was brought up at a meeting, several months back, and I think we came to the conclusion that we wanted to have as many options as possible, as to not like pigeonhole it and like lead to like multiple, for example, if we were to only allow plazas, we wouldn't want plazas all over the place. So what's the rationale for removing this section?
I think the rationale was that we did remove the in lieu of, and I think the rationale is that basically we're developing little plazas all over and it doesn't make the impact so that it should, to allow a bonus of that type.
Okay, so essentially this is the least desired of these options, and we wouldn't want
Right.
multiple new plazas in lieu of the other items that are on this list, which are potentially more desirable. Got it. That makes sense.
The impact isn't as big as the other options.
Was there not some potential difficulty with the payment in lieu of
There's definitely a problem with the payment in lieu.
mechanism?
Yes.
Because that also is I think, removed item B, the new public parking west of Abbott Road.
Right.
Because that was another potential payment in lieu of mechanism. I'm just looking at what remains, and this is, I think to Commissioner Sullivan's point, when we were talking about this, the drafting of this ordinance, and actually it was exciting because we came up with a number of what we thought were potential additional ways by which additional height might be permitted. We're now, for whatever reason, we're back down to diversified housing, low to moderate income, 55 or older, and owner occupied. There's a green building provision that I think still remains, although the specifics on that are, I think that the intention was to tie it somehow into lead points, working with the Commission for the Environment. And then significant public benefit, which is the mechanism that's used most frequently now, whereby City Council essentially deems something appropriate or needed. And part of that is one of Commissioner Wolf's suggestions to, it's item 406E 1B, which has to do with cutting edge architecture or construction techniques. I think at the time, I won't put words in your mouth, Commissioner Wolf, but I think at the time you were talking about the timber framed building that's currently, or I don't know, actually, it's presumed it's done by now. I've not been by there in a long time, but on campus. So I think that, whether other options might be available, I think that we, perhaps the ideas that we came up with are just either unsupportable or too difficult to justify legally, as exciting as they were at the time. I appreciate your, Commissioner Sullivan, your apparent disappointment that they sort of keep falling off, because I thought that there were several opportunities for us to sort of challenge people to think of different ways to, ask for additional height by giving something back to the community. Commissioner Wolf.
I sort of hate to see the public plaza or civic green option go away. In our subcommittee, and I think after that, I've given as an example, one of my favorite places along the avenue is the plaza in front of the Peanut Barrel and the credit union, and I forget exactly what the other storefronts are there right now, but and that is an example of what would qualify under this. That could be called a public plaza. And I think we could use a few more of them. And I would not really be worried about getting too many of them, because if suppose one or two projects came in proposing them and built them, and then we could decide, okay, now we have enough of them. We could always remove that as an incentive for future ones. So we are in complete control of that. And if somebody else proposed one that was going to be right next door to the Peanut Barrels, we wouldn't want that. Wouldn't want two of them right next to each other. We would have the discretion to say, no, that doesn't qualify for this. I will say though that reading section E, significant public benefit, I think if a developer wanted to build something like that, they could propose it as a significant public benefit. I'm looking at the wording of that, and I want to suggest maybe we could make a change to it. Under E1A, it's the building shall either through its proposed use contribute substantially to the mix of desirable commercial, residential, social, cultural, or employment opportunities, public amenities, or open space in the Avenue Forum District. So obviously that could be considered a public amenity or an open space. It could be both of those. But what I notice is in the very first line, it says through its proposed use. The building shall either through its proposed use. I wonder if we could expand that to say through its proposed use and or design. Because when we say use, to me, that means whether it has offices in it or restaurants or residential but it seems to me as though they should be getting, it could offer significant public benefit through its design, not strictly through its use.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a good addition. How does everyone else feel about that?
Personally, I think that sounds fine. I'm wondering if maybe the troubling provision of item D is really the payment in lieu of. Would it not be sufficient to just keep item D1 and then which would effectively accomplish exactly what Commissioner Wolf had just described? Commissioner Wolf?
One other thing we had talked about in that regard was that under D1, it says construct a new public plaza or civic green in an approved location, which implies that it might not be on the site of the development in question.
Correct.
And we've talked about that, and it seemed a little bit unlikely that that would ever happen, that someone would have another property somewhere. It wouldn't bother me much to remove that. When we were first talking about this and when we've looked at it in other people's code, I was always picturing a plaza or green that would be a part of the development that was trying to earn the extra height. And then directly to your question, yes, I have no problem with getting rid of the payment in lieu of.
And actually, I want to come back to that because you just triggered another memory for me. I think that the reason that, and I don't remember, sort of specifically how it came about, but I think that language in item 2 was trying to accommodate a project for which there was no immediately adjacent appropriate land. And so it actually wasn't something where somebody would be forced to create a public plaza or civic green. It was basically saying, look, you're building in a place that just won't, the lot's too small, for instance, but you still want to enjoy the height benefit. Here's a mechanism by which you might be able to do that. Now, if we're telling, now if we're being told that that mechanism isn't going to work, all that really does is remove an opportunity for somebody that might have otherwise been available. It's not really, it's not as if someone is being punished. It's really that I think we were trying to accommodate more people than, or more potential projects than might have otherwise been permitted. And that if that, you know, if that mechanism is removed from us, then that's, I guess, unfortunate. But, and that's why I think that that sort of in an approved location was included in that, in part one. So if part two is removed, then the approved location is superfluous. Commissioner Sullivan?
Would that kind of be like on Grand River and Abbott, that three building development, say they wanted height for the buildings on Grand River, and then for the Evergreen building, they wanted to add a plaza to that building. Would that be kind of what you're talking about? Sure. Hypothetically?
Yeah.
Head shake, but that's how I would understand it. Commissioner Wolf?
Well, that we have always been treating as a single development. All three of those buildings we've treated as a single development through the approval process. So that wouldn't really be a separate location.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't finish my thought. So I'm just trying to understand potentially substituting D into E, E1 specifically. The first sentence there says, construct a building of significant public benefit that meets all of the following requirements. So then you would also be subjecting it to requirements E2 and E3. So it would be much more stringent. Am I reading this correctly?
It has to meet number 1, 2, and 3. Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
right.
If I'm reading the first line correctly, which
right.
I think I am.
But part 1 has 2 options in it. It doesn't have to meet both A and B under number 1.
Well, you'd still have to meet number 2 and number 3.
Yes.
Okay, so that would be different than leaving it standalone in D. So it wouldn't be the same intent.
So are we going to leave it in? Just the payment in lieu removed?
I think we ought to send it to council with just the payment in lieu removed and leave that in.
Very good.
If nothing else, I like the idea that there's seemingly more choices.
Well, and some discussion about the idea. I mean, if I bought the old Bigby's from DTN and I wanted to develop something somewhere else downtown, maybe that would be an option. I could use that property and develop it as a public space and get a taller building in the next block.
Yeah, that's a good example, because there might not be another easy use for that location.
Right. All right, we'll leave it in and just take the payment in lieu out.
And then make a slight wording change in E1A.
Yes.
Yeah.
Commissioner Cahill?
As I recall, the discussion about payment in lieu that we had previously, the concern was that it couldn't be defended legally.
Right.
Yeah. My thought would be for us to leave it in and let council consider it with the city attorney there to give them the advice rather than us. I recall from the previous discussion, I wasn't totally convinced that it couldn't be defended. But I'm not giving any legal opinion on that, but and would defer to the city attorney. But I think leaving it in as a point of discussion for the council in the presence of their legal counsel would be beneficial. And they can decide whether it's defensible or not.
Vice Chair Boyle, I thought you had said to make a note, but go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think it was just a question, at least as far as I was concerned, it wasn't just a question of defense, legal defensibility for this. It was how it would be administered, where the money's going to go, how it's going to be spent. There were a lot of things that I don't like about payment in lieu. That's just my opinion. But I guess if we're considering leaving it in, I'd like a vote on that, because I do not like the concept of payment of lieu. I think it creates problems, and it's not just a question of whether we can do it legally or not. So I would disagree with leaving it in and letting council sort it out.
Although if I saw your hand, Commissioner Wolf, I just want to add to Commissioner Boyle. Did you not indicate a moment ago that when you were suggesting that it should be removed, but do so with a note indicating to council that we, sort of a mind to say that it's effectively, if not indefensible, just not a good idea. Explain to them why we're removing something that was part of an earlier draft. Commissioner Wolf?
Yeah, I'm ambivalent about it. I think I might have been the one who brought these to the subcommittee, these various payment in lieu of, because a number of other form-based codes have them. I mean, it's relatively common, not most of them, but there's quite a few. So I would also question the city attorney's comments about it with a number of other ones having them. I don't know how long they've had them or if they've been challenged, but they do have them. But the bigger issue, and we knew that from the beginning in the subcommittee, we talked about the difficulty of administering it. It seems like our requirement for art has been fairly successful, and that's essentially what that is. And we've set up the fund for that, and we've got it running, and we've got people making decisions about it. But these other ones seem more difficult. You'd have to acquire land to create the plaza or green if you're going to do that. The ones for parking, you'd have to accumulate money and figure out where to build a parking ramp. And so the practical difficulties worry me more than the legality of it. Same as Commissioner Boyle.
Commissioner Sullivan.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Wolf makes a great point, actually. And if we were to leave it, I'd be in favor of actually broadening it. I'm just thinking, perhaps enhancements to Valley Court Park to add like a farmer's market pavilion and things like that could be useful instead of just, a public plaza or a civic green somewhere else.
Excellent point. Any other discussion on that item? All right, then let's move on to item, if we're good there, on to item 8. Now actually talking about the overlays. I was just too eager to talk about it, I guess. Again, the text is in front of you. Any questions from Ms. Schmidt or comments on the text? Commissioner Wolf.
So this is saying that any of the newly rezoned areas in the Avenue Form District that happen to fall into a rental restriction overlay district are subject to that restriction, just as they are today. I haven't looked at the map as to how much overlap there is, but it seems like that's going to severely restrict development in places where that occurs.
They just couldn't get rental licenses. They can develop, they can't get rental licenses.
But so you couldn't build an apartment building, a small apartment building in an R4 if that happened to be.
Right.
I'm afraid I don't have all the, and maybe this is something that we either all can take a look at or keep in mind, I guess. I'm looking at one of the central, excuse me, the Central Bailey neighborhood overlay, which would impact the, there's a R2 area and an R and a smaller and a portion of an R3 area. So that basically impacting a relatively light intensity portion of the Shaping the Avenue district. It's the southwest corner of Elizabeth and Bailey, and then basically 1 block west of there and 2 blocks south of there. So I actually don't, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with what the other zones are, but I think that they're, I don't know whether they can go into College Grove or not. But I guess this is something that, this has been on my mind for a while now, that is this something where that was going to get cast out entirely. And only because the way that the Shaping the Avenue district is formed would place the rental restriction overlay on one side of the street, would still remain in place, and not on, which is to say on the, let's just say the east side of Bailey, it's the 400 block, and not the west side of Bailey on the 400 block. So it's basically you'd have a place where directly across the street, you'd have the new Shaping the Avenue district in place, and right across the street from there, you'd have the in fact, in this case, it's an RR1 overlay. Perhaps this requires a little bit more, certainly by me, review, but basically we're just saying that the overlays that are in place would remain in place, which seems to be what, I wasn't a part of the neighborhood at the time, but the indication is that, there is that the neighbors that were and voted for it wanted to see it in place and would probably want to see it remain in place.
Yeah, I don't have the complete maps here to look at, but now that you say that, I guess it sounds as though there's probably not going to be that big an overlap between them.
And as I say, that's why I asked earlier when we weren't talking about overlays, but now that we are, that is if there, if there is indeed a mechanism to remove that, to remove an overlay if it's desired, at least there's a way to do that, so that we're not hemmed in by decisions made by perhaps past property owners, actually, as properties continue to turn over. It's probably not a discussion specifically for tonight, but I'm curious. I presume there's some limit, a sort of lower limit that would establish the neighborhood size. Say, for instance, if all the property owners in one block decided that they wanted to lift the restriction, would that be sufficient? Or is there like a sort of a larger area that would be impacted? I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. Vice Chair Boyle, maybe you do?
Well, I think it would have to be, the rental overlay, restriction overlay districts are specific and have specific boundaries. So if you're going to remove the overlay, I think it would have to be a sufficient number from within those boundaries, that same boundary. I don't think you could start carving out pieces of particular overlay. You either keep the overlay or the whole thing is gone.
Right. I guess the reason I certainly wouldn't expect that we'd make holes in the middle of it, but if, a small group or, somewhat large, but not majority, not a 2/3 majority of the people of the properties within the overlay wanted to be omitted, it doesn't seem to me to be unreasonable. Ms. Schmidt?
It's possible. You have to have a minimum of 50 houses.
There you go.
Possible if you have a really large overlay, you could carve out the edges of it, but it has to be contiguous. You can't just pull houses out of the middle.
So it's 50, it sounds like, is the number by which, okay. And it's whatever, it's a 2/3 of 50, actually. Okay. Anyway, again, it's probably not for discussion necessarily tonight. Commissioner Wolf, and then let's focus on the text. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this looks like the right way to handle it.
Yeah.
I don't really have any concerns about doing it this way.
Sure. Anyone else? All right, then. Move us on to item 9. This is the text is actually on the next, it's actually on the next page, the new text. But this has to do with diversified housing. There was one thing that stuck out to me, and I'm going to just sound it, and maybe I'm incorrect, but we refer to the mixed use districts. Should we not perhaps be referring to mixed use frontages? I'm trying to find an example.
Yeah, I think we should.
Frontages, right.
That it's, yeah, sorry. So you understand what I'm saying is that it's
Yeah.
not so much the district, but those places where so multiple family dwellings in business, in business districts and mixed use frontages, for instance. That's the very lead in. And then, sort of consistently refer to the frontages as opposed to the districts.
Good catch.
Yeah, thanks. It's just one of those, we're just going to have to get used to new language or newer language.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts about the language that's in front of us? Commissioner Wolf?
I'm concerned that if we change this, we're winding up with very few bonuses. It seemed as though this was likely to be the most used bonus to gain additional height. And we're kind of running out of bonuses now. I'm not necessarily opposed, but we're kind of changing the whole philosophy here and going back to what our current B3 regulations are.
Yeah. Lee Schmidt? Yep.
Yeah, I think Vice Chair Boyle had brought this to our attention quite some time ago. We would be by putting it there, we would be taking away something that we've already implemented as a policy generally to require any mixed use building with multiple family to do this. Now we're saying you don't have to do that anymore unless you want additional height. So I don't know if that would be something that council would be accepting of, to take it out of what's required now and not as part of a bonus.
Commissioner Wolf?
I'll agree with that, definitely. We don't know what council would think of it, but is that really a reason not to forward it to them that way? It is a change, but we change our code at different times, and buildings built at different times have to meet different requirements.
Vice Chair Boyle?
Well, I think it would be a big blow to diversification of housing in the downtown. And for that reason alone, I would oppose it. I think we ought to continue with the program that is now in place and give it a chance to work. If what we do is limit the requirement for diversification of housing only to those developments that need, what is it, more than 10 stories now? When's the bonus kick in? More than 10?
I can't remember.
Well, anyway, if we limit it only to the developments that are very tall, then I don't think we're going to have the amount of diversification downtown that the city's been trying to get for the past 10 or more years.
To answer your question, in the M4, which pretty much corresponds to B3, the maximum height with no bonuses is only 6 stories. And we know that our current crop of developers have pretty much zero interest in building 6-story structures. They want to go taller. So if they wanted to, they have to earn it through one or more of these bonuses. And the thinking was that this would be the one that would be used most often with no guarantee. So you're definitely correct. It would not be requiring it for as many buildings.
You know, if that's the choice, I would prefer that we use the current language for bonuses, which is basically that thing that says it's a benefit to the city, not that it's providing diversified housing. I just, I think it would be a bad change to remove that requirement from the downtown area, the diversification requirement from the downtown area.
Should we do a vote, or how would you like to handle this, Chairperson Bowman?
I'm thinking, because I don't know, I maybe it's not a good reason to hang on to it in the way that it's written now, but I really like the idea of having sort of providing different options for gaining additional height, and that Commissioner Wolf's point about depending on where you build, it's actually not only unlikely, but I won't say physically impossible, but extremely unlikely, and I mean literally physically, to do something of that, sort of, we're not going to see many buildings that are going to stop at 6, because once you get the additional height, the method of construction was going to typically change. And so we're not going to get sort of, either you're going to go relatively low, say 4 stories or lower, or you're going to go 8 or higher. That we're just not going to see that. So that in order to get say the 2 extra floors above 6, for instance, and up to 10, there's going to be a requirement to diversify housing. The flip side of that, of course, is as the vice chair has said, is that anything built, say for instance, in M3 at 4 stories or lower, or excuse me, it has to start at 2 to 4 stories, might not have a diversified housing element in it. Commissioner Wolf, and then Vice Chair Boyle.
To me, this seems like a complicated enough issue and an interesting alternative way of handling it that we should send it on to City Council with this option in there. And they may have very strong opinions about it, just as Vice Chair Boyle does, and they'll take it out.
Vice Chair, I saw your hand as well.
Yes, I'd agree. I'd send it on with both of the diversification provisions in it. And I would note that it's just one of the ways of getting bonus height. So you still might not diversify, because a developer might seek, or developers might seek, to use the other provisions that entitle them to bonus height. And we wouldn't have diversification happening like we do now. So I would send it on to council with both of the diversification provisions intact.
Ms. Schmidt, that doesn't really give you an answer. I guess we're not, it sounds like we're not as a group inclined to vote specifically, at least not yet. Are you comfortable with the idea of dividing up the 2 options and making that clear to council?
So put both options in the plan?
Vice Chair?
Well, just leave the language the way it is right now.
Okay.
And if, council looks at it and decides that, well, wait a minute, this isn't really necessary because we've already got diversification, all well and good. But if they don't read it that way, then
Great.
so be it.
Sound good?
That sounds terrific. Yep,
All
Commissioner.
right.
Wolf. Commissioner Wolf. Yep.
So it would be important to point out to them that the Avenue Code does not contain the requirement for diversified housing anymore.
Yes, and we, as part of the presentation, we will list all of the current policies that are addressed in it and ones that aren't. So that will help too.
Okay. Any other comments or questions regarding item 9? And then finally, item 10, uses within the districts. Staff's recommending eliminating those from the chart that aren't allowed in the shaping the avenue boundaries. We thought marijuana was one. Are there, go ahead, Ms. Schmidt.
The transport, marijuana transport and grow, and those ones are not allowed. So we'll leave the provisioning center in, and with the note where they can find the map, and then take the other centers out.
Okay, that brings us to, excuse me, to the end of tonight's list, if I'm not mistaken.
You're correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm just looking at the next page. All right, so will we proceed in the same manner? I'm trying to see if there's anything in particular where you were, you're waiting for opinions, or I guess what we're really looking for now is the work you were going to do with the city attorney regarding the architectural standards.
And next, what I'll do is I'll incorporate all the physical edits that we made to the document before we got into the bigger issues. I will have a copy of a markup of like changing little things that we changed throughout the document. But then I'll also have this revised so we can go down through each of the changes and make sure that they've all been made. And we'll probably have a couple more meetings to look at that. And some of the things that we may not have caught that need, by making one change, there might be another change that has to be made. If any of those come up, they'll be added to this and brought up to the meeting. And we'll start out with a fresh copy with all the changes done.
Terrific. Any other, I guess, questions or ideas from Ms. Schmidt? All right, then I'll oops, Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, I didn't quite have this prepared, but and I can't find it now, but back on the issue of transparency of windows. It was an issue that Jim Rosowski brought up. This is something I was going to bring up later in the meeting, the fact that the city of Lansing has adopted their form-based code now. I don't know how many were aware of that. It goes into effect May 1st for the entire city. It's a brand new code. It's going to be quite an experiment for them. And I've been looking at it, and I noticed how they handled the transparency issue. And I have it open here, but I can't find it in their code. But I can describe what they did. They have language that's very similar to ours, and it's actually more strict. It requires the glass areas to be to have 90% light transmission, which is higher than what we require. But then they have in there a sort of escape clause, you might call it, that says this can be reduced when energy efficiency and other standards require it, or something. I'm sorry, I didn't get the exact language. But to me, that seemed like it might be a good way to possibly address this issue, to keep the numbers that we have in there now and allow some flexibility if it really does conflict with other standards.
Which is what
would everyone be comfortable with me going ahead and using their language at the tail end of ours and adding that as one of the changes to make?
I think that'd be fine. I think it actually addresses the energy code issues that Mr. Marzowski was raising, that basically saying, keep it clear unless there's, sort of an overriding, in this case, code that dictates otherwise.
Great.
Yes, I mean, I believe it actually specifically made a reference to energy use requirements. I don't understand why I can't find it now, but
I'll get that language and add it to ours, and I'll add that change to our list here as well.
Thank you. All right, any other items regarding the shaping the avenue? All right. Sorry, I'm looking for tonight's agenda. That'll move us on to item 9, Commissioner concerns. I see Commissioner Cahill. And then Commissioner.
I was actually bringing this up in relation to what Chris was just talking about.
That's fine.
When we're talking about, we established transparency requirements for the windows, but then the business opens up and starts covering the windows with sale signs and all that kind of thing. I know there may be some legal issues that limit what we can do about that, but is there something we can do about that?
Good question. I can find out.
That sounds like it's likely. I mean, Ms. Schmidt, tell me if I'm wrong, but that sounds like more likely to be an enforcement issue that
Right.
potentially, of any other, similar to any other potential violation to the zoning code. If a fixture is installed that causes too much light pollution on a neighboring lot, then that's a potential zoning violation, and it would get investigated by staff and resolved. I'm fully sympathetic to that, Commissioner Cahill. On my morning walks, it usually takes me along the new, the property on the northwest corner of Bailey and Grand River. They've added some window decals along the alley. And so as I approach the alley, I have to really slow down and listen and peek my head around, because normally there were glass both the east and the north face of that building along the alley, and I could just look through the glass and see no one's coming. Now it's, it slows me a bit, but it is one of those, you've got to be a little bit more cautious, just because those last 2 panels were covered with opaque. They're pretty, they're sort of signage, but it definitely limits your view. And I don't know, I guess it's one of those things we're trying to avoid, I guess. I thought I saw another hand. Commissioner Wolf? Yep.
yeah, we actually address part of that in our current code, in our sign ordinance within, I can't remember if it's within the DDA district or the B3 or how it's defined, but in some part of the downtown, they can't have more than 25% of window surface covered with signs.
Right.
And that has been difficult to enforce. I've heard from the people in charge. People in the businesses think nothing of putting up another sign, and many of them aren't aware of the limit. And I can see it being a problem, but we do have it as an ordinance.
I would also expect, as it mentioned, unless someone's going to walk around and check every building with a tape measure and a calculator just to figure out what the percentage of area is, probably a gut feeling, and then follow up with, is it 25% or is it 22%? Commissioner Wolf, did you have a concern?
I have 3. They're not all concerns, but I found the language in Lansing's code. Should I just send it to you, Darcy?
That would be great. Thank you.
It says, glass shall be clear with light transmission at the ground story at least 90%, which is higher than our requirement, and for the upper stories, 75%. And then in parentheses, it says, modification as necessary to meet any applicable building and energy code requirements. That's how they handle it with that. So I can copy that and email it to you, or?
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. And let's see, two other things. One, I've noticed on the Graduate Hotel and to some extent on the Abbott, they seem to have a lot more visible equipment on the roof than I would have expected. I thought we were requiring them to screen their equipment on the roof, but if you approach from the west, either heading east on Grand River or heading, what would it be, northeast on Michigan Avenue, and you look at those two buildings, there's a real mess of stuff showing up on the roof. I'm wondering, could you check
Yeah,
on that?
I'll check on that.
It's possible maybe they haven't finished screening or something, but it does not look the way I would have expected it to come out. And then the third thing, as I mentioned, City of Lansing has approved a form-based code for the entire city going into effect May 1st. It's almost 300 pages long. They have, I think it's 10 commercial and mixed use districts. They have 8 residential districts. They have 5 what they call industrial or institutional districts. And in fact, I use the word district. That was one of the interesting things, that they are treating it as like a standard zoning code. They are zoning the lots rather than the frontages. So that was interesting. They also classify their streets, all of their streets, into, there's at least, I think, 6 different categories, and I can't remember the names for all of them. And when you look at the code, you find that even within a specific district, the requirement along a, let's say, an arterial street in that district would be different than along a feeder street in that district. So unlike ours, where the frontages are consistent around a particular property, they can have different requirements. Much of the language, I was surprised at this, is identical to our code. It obviously came from the same source, and it is considerably more strict than our code. It has things in it that we had in ours to start with and removed during the review process. So, and in fact, most of the things that we heard comments from Tim Rosowski and the Hagans, and I forget who all else we heard comments from, almost all of the things they object to are in the Lansing code. Things like the dimensions of awnings. I can't remember the other examples right now, but it was interesting to see how similar those are. And then one last comment I found interesting. They have a section called Architectural Standards, which is a very long one. And it actually combines what we call building form standards and architectural standards into the same section. So they're considering all of those to be architectural standards. So that was an interesting, different approach. And then I guess finally, their descriptions of their districts are laid out a lot more like our old code, or like a traditional code, where as you read through, you encounter each district one by one. So they tell you about the lowest density residential district first, and there's quite a few pages all describing that district, as opposed to ours, which tends to show them all side by side. And we show all of our M districts within one section, and you can kind of look across tables and see how they compare to each other. You can't really do that in the Lansing code. You'd have to jump 5 pages away to see what the requirements are in the next least dense district or something like that. So it's more like our current code is. And I'm not necessarily saying that's bad or good, but it's just interesting to see the differences.
Mhm.
Thank you. We'll look. Did you say it's going to be presented to their council in May, or it's going into effect?
Council approved it in March, and it goes into effect May 1st.
All right, thank you for that. Any other commissioner concerns? Commissioner Cahill.
I'd just like to concur with Commissioner Wolf's concerns expressed about the mechanicals on top of the Graduate Hotel and the Abbott. It's just a terrible thing to look at as you're traveling east on Michigan or Grand River coming into our downtown, and hopefully there's going to be some screening up there. But if there's not, maybe we should be considering standards to require it.
Good point.
Any other concerns? All right, then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved, Cahill.
Wolf, second.
Helen, seconded by Commissioner Wolf. There's no discussion. Let's have a voice vote on that. All those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Very well. We are adjourned at 8:43. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, and
Thank you.
good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.